Shut down due to depleted raw materials and liquidation, questions are now being raised about companies' responsibility to ensure environmental rehabilitation. So what happens now? Let's find out from CEO of the Federation for Sustainable Environment, Mariette Liefferink. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it. Put this into perspective for us. How much damage and pollution does mining cause?
Well, mining by its very definition is unsustainable. We recognize, of course, that mining contributes handsomely to the GDP, a gross domestic product, but it has profound, often irreversible impacts on ecosystems. And it is, of course, unacceptable for mining companies to move on, leaving gaping holes in the ground, polluted water, and unenriched and disrupted communities.
So what's the responsibility of mining companies when it comes to dealing with the pollution they cause?
Well, first of all, when a mining company enters, it's through an application for environmental authorization, it is bound by the legally binding Environmental Management Program report, which proposes mitigation or management measures. It also has to put forward a rehabilitation fund to address unscheduled closure and scheduled closure. In terms of our 2015 regulations for financial provisions for mining, mining companies must also make provision not only for current impacts, but also for residual impacts. That is, including the pumping and treatment of extraneous water or polluted water.
Now, Mintails Mining announced liquidation. Some are saying they're going to get away without having to do what they need to do in terms of dealing with the pollution they caused. So what happens in that instance?
Yes. In terms of the law, that is the Mineral and Petroleum Resources Development Regulations, a mining company, when they cease operations, must then apply for a closure certificate. That closure certificate must then address what a mining company should do to eliminate, for example, air pollution, dust fallout, or to eliminate ground or surface water contamination, how to remediate the land to a sustainable, predetermined and agreed upon land use with associated resources such as water. When that application is made, then the Department of Mineral Resources will issue a closure certificate, and then some of those rehabilitation funds, or all, may then be transferred back to a mining company. Regrettably, the Department of Mineral Resources, I now refer specifically to the gold mining industry, which is a sunset industry, it's in decline. Not one closure certificate had been issued by the Department of Mineral Resources. The result is that many mining companies, such as Mintails, either apply for care and maintenance, which is simply an abandonment of responsibilities, or putting these mining operations in warehouse conditions, or alternatively, they simply go into business rescue and then into liquidation. The result is that the impacts and the costs are then externalized to neighboring mining companies, to a mute environment, an environment that has no voice, or to beleaguered municipalities, that is financially beleaguered municipalities, to future generations and to the community.
So they get away with it, and that's a problem. So how do we change things to make sure that they don't get away with it? Because let's remember, these mining companies made millions in profits over the past couple of years.
So prior to a mining company being authorized to mine, an environmental authorization, there ought to be sufficient rehabilitation funds to address the impacts. There is, of course, no excuse to state that the impacts had been historic or its legacy issues. If a mining company applies for a mining right, it acquires both the assets and also the liabilities. In terms of our National Environmental Management Act, a wide pool of persons can be held responsible for failure of duty of care, including directors individually and collectively, operators of mines, managers, predecessors, and also successors in title. I may just mention Mintails is an excellent case that should not be perpetuated. Mintails had a closure that is now a closure liability, environmental liability of 336 million rand. They had a bank guarantee of 2.6 million rand, and they had a rehabilitation fund of 25 million rand. So it is significantly underfunded.
Yeah. And lastly, let's talk about the communities who are affected by this pollution. If a mining company does not live up to its expectations and responsibility in dealing with pollution, what happens to those communities?
1.6 million people are living on radioactive mine residue areas within Gauteng. The communities are the recipients of significant dust fallout because the tailing storage facilities or mine dumps are unvegetated with erosion gullies. They are also the recipients of polluted water, such as acid mine water, which they use for not only drinking purposes, domestic purposes, spiritual rituals, such as baptisms and recreational purposes.
All right, thank you so much for your time and your insight. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was CEO of the Federation for Sustainable Environment, Mariette Liefferink.